Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of At the Boundary, the podcast from the Global and National Security Institute at the University of South Florida. I'm Jim Cardoso, Senior Director for GNSI, and your host for At the Boundary. Today on the show, we're excited to announce the newest GNSI research initiative on the future of warfare. Our guest today will be GNSI Senior Research Fellow Dr. Rob Burrell, who's leading the initiative. He'll be using his extensive experience in the concept of resilience and resistance to create a roadmap for what future global conflict will look like. He'll be joining us in just a minute. A couple quick notes first. The latest post from our Notes from Cambridge student blog is now on our website. We sent two USF students, Kyle Rudd and May Birch, across the pond for the summer to study at the world-renowned Cambridge International Security and Intelligence Program. This week, May writes about connecting with USF President Ray Law while in the UK, as well as other great experiences she and Kyle are having. We'll drop a link to their blog in the show notes too. By the way, we do plan to send students to ISI every summer. USF students, start building your resume for next year's application. We also need external support, so if it's something you'd like to help sponsor, drop us a note. We'd love to have a conversation with you. We're also looking forward to Cyber Bay 2025 as USF's new Bellini College of Artificial Intelligence, Cybersecurity, and Computing is working with Cyber Florida, Bellini Capital, and the USF Institute for AI Plus X to build one of the premier cybersecurity and AI events in the country. GNSI is partnering to put together the national security segment for the conference. It's slated for October 13th through 15th in downtown Tampa, and a registration link is in the show notes. GNSI is also partnering with one of the country's leading national security institutions to organize a follow-on event right here on the USF campus on October 16th. We'll have the official announcement and details in the near future, so stay tuned. All right, let's bring on Dr. Rob Burrell, GNSI Senior Research Fellow and one of the world's foremost authorities on irregular warfare concepts of resilience and resistance. He also holds a fellowship in the prestigious Irregular Warfare Initiative and is on the doorstep of publishing his latest book, Resilience and Resistance: Interdisciplinary Lessons in Competition, Deterrence, and Irregular Warfare. Rob, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So it's been a few months since we previously spoke on At the Boundary, and beyond finalizing the book and getting the Future of Warfare initiative going, what else have you been working on?
Well, last month, we brought on the study of internal conflict from the Army War College to USF. This offers a huge opportunity for research about irregular warfare for USF students. And additionally, we brought on alumni, Dr. Chris Mason from the War College, as a senior non-resident fellow. So this research program has sparked a lot of interest already from USF students, but also some students outside of USF who've contacted both of us. Chris and I published recently an article on civil war in Myanmar, and we used the study of internal conflicts 5-factor analysis to determine if the Myanmar government could win. And that article was published by the National Interest. So the study of internal conflict and its 50 case studies has a lot of promise. Going forward, it's exciting stuff. Yeah,
I saw that. And the Myanmar article that you wrote as well, I found that really interesting, discussing the critical rare earth elements there that are existing there and some of the political nuances that go with trying to have access to them.
That's right. So, the catch and resistance is important because of the international implications of rare earths. Unfortunately, to get international attention, sometimes you have to have something in the bag, right? So that's what they have in the bag.
Yes, they do. And we'll be talking about rare earths more in GNSI as we look at our technology policy boundary type of research. And obviously rare earths play a big role in that. In this podcast, though, we're introducing a new GNSI initiative on the future of warfare, and you're leading that effort. Tell us about it.
Sure. Well, I'm really excited about the Future of Warfare series. The inspirational event driving the series is the release of my new book, which you talked about, Resilience and Resistance. This book presents an entirely new lens to utilize for the study of tomorrow's conflict. To inform this series, I'm bringing in the best warfighters and academics to discuss how warfare is changing and how the United States can prepare for that. In the first episode, I'll interview General Charles Cleveland, in my opinion, the greatest American general to ever prosecute unconventional warfare. He performed remarkably in Afghanistan and Iraq. I also want to talk to Colonel Dave Maxwell about the Pacific Theater in particular. Dave Maxwell is an expert on North Korea. The second episode is a virtual live cast with Dr. Chris Mason. I mentioned him earlier about the study of internal conflict. Mason is the scholar who developed the study of internal conflict. So we're going to talk about this study virtually with a global audience. Mason is going to examine how scholars and practitioners can leverage this study for predictive analysis in determining the outcomes of ongoing civil wars and insurgencies. I'm really excited about the third episode with my lifelong mentor, historian Dr. Craig Simons. Simons has written over 20 books on warfare. His latest is a history of Admiral Chester Nimitz in World War II, and we plan to discuss the Pacific War and then what lessons the Pacific War offers for future conflict, perhaps with China. In the fourth episode, I'll meet with Colonel Brian Pettit and talk about a very popular topic in special operations circles, the resistance operating concept. This is a strategy of the nation state organizing resistance to occupation prior to conflict even happening. It's a radical idea which has caught hold in several countries, including the Baltic. Then in the fifth episode, I'll interview Dr. Chris Marsh, who teaches irregular warfare with National Defense University at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. We're going to discuss Russia and its special operations forces, as well as Russia's irregular strategies utilizing conflict recently, particularly in Ukraine. And in the last episode, I'll meet with Dr. Namrata Goswami from Johns Hopkins University to talk about artificial intelligence, cyber, and space, and how special operations can leverage these in future conflict. Dr. Goswami is one of the leading experts in these types of technologies, and I think that discussion is going to be out of this world.
Is there any strategy you pursue to bring these type? I mean, it's a wide variety of speakers. You have some longtime practitioners. You have some academics. You have some that are right at that, doing that advanced technology and application to it. It's a pretty broad spectrum. Are they people you knew, or is a combination of people you knew and just some of the eminent experts in the field, or what?
Yeah, so working at Special Operations Command at the university for 4 years, I brought on into my curriculum a lot of academics and practitioners on certain topics to give exposure to the students to all those different fields. Also, the position I held as an assistant professor at the university was specifically an interdisciplinary scholar. So I couldn't just rely on history. And so I had to build a curriculum that had all those different facets in it: engineering, it had diplomacy, and it had, the practice, the practitioner, which is really good for special operations students because you got to be able to translate, what's an academic topic into actual real world practice, right? And so I like to have practitioners. I had every single one of these folks that are part of the book that I just wrote and that are part of the series. I worked with in instructing irregular warfare with special operations students.
Yeah, I worked for General Cleveland in Iraq in 2009. He was my direct boss while I was during my deployed time over there, and I would agree with you. I mean, I think very highly of the man, and really enjoyed working for him. And he knew his stuff when it came to the special forces world, irregular warfare, unconventional warfare, those types of areas. He was definitely had that expertise. How did you meet? How'd you get to know him?
Well,
through JSOW or prior to that?
I started on my journey with irregular warfare and unconventional warfare while I was the doctor-in-chief at SOCOM. So 2011 through 14 is really when I created my human network on the topic. And then later when I taught at JSOW, I asked General Cleveland to come speak when I taught unconventional warfare, as kind of a capstone speaker to come and get questions from the students or talk about Task Force Viking, which was the largest unconventional warfare campaign ever conducted by the United States. Over 50 ODAs. So it was huge. I mobilized 50,000 Peshmerga to fight against Saddam Hussein. So he participated in all those for free. And, I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, that's fantastic. So you mentioned the book, so let's turn to the book now, the book on resilience and resistance. So why did you write it?
Like I said, I was working at JSAL, Joint Special Operations University, and in 2021, the House resolution on the consortium to study irregular warfare came out. So Congress specifically identified the need for the DoD to educate on irregular warfare. This came about after 2 decades of war in the Middle East and in recognition that the DoD had made some mistakes, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. I taught irregular warfare, unconventional warfare, and counterterrorism at Joint Special Operations University. So I understood where Congress was coming from. There wasn't a single textbook in the DoD or in academia, for that matter, on teaching and learning irregular warfare. This isn't the first time I had seen this happen. So when I was at the Naval Academy and I taught Marine Corps history in 2003 and 2004, there wasn't a textbook on Marine Corps history, believe it or not, that you could use as a textbook in a class. So in 2003, I wrote one called Crucibles, Selected Readings in U.S. Marine Corps History. So 2 decades later, I decided the best way to get after irregular warfare education was to do the same thing, write a book, and that's what I did.
Well, I also read, in as I was getting ready for this podcast, that you were either an author or you were behind the writing of Joint Pub 3-05.1.
That's right.
Which is on irregular warfare. I didn't realize that until
on unconventional warfare.
Yeah, until just prior to this podcast, I realized we had that type of capability in our midst.
It's a whole story there. But yes, I was able to bring the first joint doctoral pub on unconventional warfare into the DoD.
Well, I spent most of my time in the joint world during my time in the Air Force, so I was very familiar with the joint pubs. And I always wondered who were the people behind writing those things, and now I am sitting across the table from one.
That's right.
Very exciting. Good times, exactly. You talked about some of the practitioners, the eminent practitioners and scholars that help you write this book. Could you tell us a little bit more about them?
Sure. Irregular warfare, deterrence, and competition are the 3 areas covered in this book, and that's a lot of material to explain. And we wanted the lessons to be interdisciplinary. So the book is broken down into chapters on military science, political science, international relations, sociology, history, and engineering. So there's a mix of academics and practitioners throughout the book, and that was purposefully done. We wanted to ensure that every lesson had practical application, and this is not just knowledge presented for the sake of learning, but in utilizing in conflict. So the breakdown by subject in the book, about 40% is applied science of irregular warfare. Then we pretty much cover what the DoD calls the 4+1. So that's the 4 primary adversaries of the United States, which are China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And then the +1 stands for violent extremist organizations. So to get at all those topics, we have authors from the U.S. Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, National Defense University, from the University of South Florida, from the State Department, from NATO, from Special Operations Command, and from Johns Hopkins. And then to top the cake, the foreword is written by Lieutenant General Charles Cleveland. This book really does have an all-star cast, and it tackles education on irregular warfare like it's never been done before.
Like you said, the first of its kind. It really does this, correct?
It is, yeah. There's no textbook on irregular warfare.
Okay. So, I definitely, and when does it come out? It comes out soon, but
it should be out when this podcast is released.
Oh, that's soon. Okay,
yes.
It's real soon. All right, excellent. Well, that's good. Well, we can maybe we can link something in the show notes potentially to help people find it really quickly. So, talking about the book, the first article, it talks about the resilience and resistance model, and it really establishes the framework for the entire book and really informs a lot of your research on the future of warfare as well. So I think it's worth spending, a few minutes diving into that a bit. First baseline. I would think a lot of people listening to this podcast may hear resilience and resistance. Not sure exactly what that is. Could you go and explain to us what that means?
Yeah. So irregular warfare can sometimes comprise a subcomponent state-on-state conflict. So, World War II, there's irregular warfare happening. But it normally occurs within a single state. So the two forces in the state at work against each other comprise the resiliency of the current government and its institutions, combating against resistance elements who desire change, right? And so this yin and yang of resistance and resilience pulling on each other to determine the nature of future governance, it occurs within every state. Every state has resiliency institutions and actors, and every state has resistance to them. Sometimes resistance results in public demonstrations or protests, something nonviolent, and sometimes it emerges in political violence. Intrastate conflict has exploded since the end of World War II. So in 1946, there were about 18 countries with rebellions and insurgencies. In 2024, there's 60. That's about a third of all nations. So in addition to the growing trend in intrastate conflict, external nations have increasingly become involved in trying to shape the outcome of these civil wars. That phenomenon is called internationalized intrastate conflict. Of the 60 nations currently battling internal violence, about 40% are internationalized. So these some examples, that most people are familiar with because of recent events: Sudan, Libya, Yemen. These are all internationalized examples of interstate conflict. So when you compare the frequency of intrastate conflict with state-on-state conflict, how many state-on-state conflicts are happening right now?
Just one, right?
I mean, the main one you think about
the main one is Russia and Ukraine.
Ukraine and Russia, right? So
state-on-state, yeah. Now,
even though intrastate conflict is the new norm, it's happening with increased frequency. The U.S. Department of Defense and its State Department are predispositioned to address state-on-state conflict. I mean, that's what they focus on. Mm-hmm. That's their bread and butter. Today, the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps are all preparing for a conventional war in the Pacific with China, right?
Yeah.
So in a new era of this multipolar world, the future world order will likely be determined in these internationalized interstate conflict, not in a World War III, which probably won't happen. So this is what my book addresses. It's how the U.S. government and its military can understand interstate conflict across a spectrum of nonviolent resistance through civil war, and how can the U.S. government support partners, both state and non-state actors, to achieve U.S. foreign policy objectives. The subtitle of the book says Lessons in Deterrence, Competition, and Irregular Warfare, because those are the primary battlegrounds in which we will likely win or lose, not in conventional war.
The model specifies 4 components or nodes, basically, to help scholars, practitioners understand the dynamics of change occurring within the context of interstate conflict. Can you talk a little bit about these nodes?
Sure. So the first scholar to recognize and draw out these types of nodes was Gordon McCormick, and he wrote about the shining path of insurgency in Peru in the 1970s. I adapted McCormick's work to demonstrate that those 4 nodes are part of all interstate conflict, including nonviolent resistance and not just insurgencies. So I broadened the model to encompass all resilience and resistance activities. The 2 nodes opposing one another include the resistance node on one side of the model and then the resilience node on the other side. The resistance node desires institutional change. The resilience node wants to maintain the status quo. So now the 2 other nodes include the domestic population, which both resilience and resistance are trying to influence and pull in their direction, and then the international audience. An international sponsor, is the ones we look at mostly are states, but it doesn't have to be a state. It can be the diaspora, or it could be illicit organizations, religious organizations. In fact, the Pope just recently intervened in Syria, right? So he's taking a stand for the Druze in Syria. It could be corporations. Corporations are involved in many interstate conflicts, particularly in Africa. So within this framework, a very dynamic interaction is taking between all 4 nodes of resilience, resistance, the domestic population, and the international audience. each of the nodes has agency, and all are attempting to determine the future of the state.
And this framework, I think sometimes you can think of this in terms of, okay, this is what's happening in some type of active conflict, but this may not be an active conflict. I mean, these types of this resiliency, resistance, this yin and yang, as you talked about, and these 4 nodes, these are happening around the world in multiple locations at all times, right, impacted by states, non-states, industry, all sorts of different actors as well.
100%. So whenever I start talking about these models, most Americans will stop and ask me, have you done this for the United States? I say, no, I don't do domestic stuff, but I could. I mean, I can't. Every time something happens in the United States, of course, as an academic, I'm looking at it, but I'm not writing about it. In fact, when I was I went to NATO to do a discussion about some of my typologies and discussing it at the NATO Special Forces School. And when I was talking about the nonviolent aspects of resistance versus resilience, I got all these weird, facial things like, oh, that doesn't happen with us. I was like, 1 million people just protested in Paris yesterday. Mm-hmm. You weren't paying attention?
Yeah.
That's your ally. That's your partner. So you should be paying attention to resistance, not just in those that you want to support the resistance to, but in states where you might want to subvert the resistance and help your partner be successful.
Yeah, there's lessons learned. It doesn't mean that the state is in the verge of collapse, but there's lessons to be learned from that. And I'm it's hard not to look. It's no secret that it's a politically dynamic time in the United States right now. So I mean, you can sit back and you can take some of these models, and especially I would recommend everybody look at the book. As you get the book, look at the book, and you can see these models, and you can kind of see things that are happening right now.
Of course,
there's a resilience, there's a resistance mode, there's a all these things are happening in the U.S. I think it's wise that you stay away from projecting them too much as an academic. But I mean, mentally go for it. Yeah, absolutely. Right. But I think it's interesting as we do things at GNSI, as you put this book out so that people can understand this model and how to apply it. I mean, you should be able to apply it to situations across the world and even here in continental United States as well.
It's happening all around us. One of the lessons I would teach special forces folks before they went down range was, don't just count the AK-47s. Look at the graffiti.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. No, that's great. So you also touch on the resistance continuum as a way to provide, scale to the level of protests against the government. Can you talk about that and maybe even provide some examples so that, people can hear this, understand, oh, okay, yeah, I get what he's talking about.
Sure. Well, resistance comes in many forms. Each resistance movement is unique. However, there are commonalities in resistance which can be used to categorize their general nature. Additionally, the methods of resistance movement utilized has implications in international law. So these typologies have legal significance. John Cosgrove and Aaron Hahn, both lawyers from Johns Hopkins, first introduced these terms about 7 years ago with U.S. Army Special Operations Command. So the 5 types of resistance typologies describe how these organizations resist, either through nonviolent but legal means, that's one type, or through illegal means, but which cause no harm to other humans, that's another type, or through the use of limited violence or rebellion, or through a well-developed insurgency, or in an all-out civil war. I'll provide some examples of each. So most people would recognize Martin Luther King Jr.'s movement as using nonviolent, but primarily legal means of resistance, like demonstrations. Now, violence could erupt from a peaceful protest, but MLK's activists were extremely disciplined and accepted the brutality of the state's response without responding in kind. King expected this. This was desired for him.
Yeah.
And through the medium of television, his movement achieved empathy from the rest of America and the global audience to support his objectives of equal voting rights. Mm. So using nonviolent legal means has some real strengths as a typology, but it's probably more effective in democracies than in, authoritarian states.
Yeah, a term you use in the book to refer to that people have probably heard is civil disobedience.
Yes.
That's one not doesn't capture it all, but it's kind of that area is where the nonviolent legal seems to reside.
There's a lot of terms. Nonviolent action is another. So the second resistance typology is nonviolent, but it's illegal. So Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad, which helped slaves move from slave states to free states, provides an excellent example. Tubman didn't use violence, but her actions of resistance were inherently illegal under congressional law. The third category is rebellion. Rebellion uses violence against humans, okay? But it's normally small in size or duration. Nat Turner's slave revolt in 1831 is a good example. Turner used violence. He killed, I think, 55 people. Simultaneously, local government rooted him out fairly quickly. So rebellion is like a small flare-up of violent resistance.
But this is the first one. The first two really are not designed to be violent. The violence may occur in them, but they're not designed to be violence. Whereas in rebellion, that's where violence is truly a tool.
Yeah, your target is other humans.
Yeah.
In the last three examples here. So the fourth category I described is insurgency. So in this form of violence, the state cannot deal with the intensity of the combatants, right? So it uses its armed component. It uses its own military to fight the insurgency. And that's really the difference between rebellion and insurgency, is that the state can no longer address it through law enforcement. It has to use its own military against its own population.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fourth or the fifth category is belligerency or civil war, right? And so the best example of that is in the U.S. Civil War is the Confederacy, right? In this case, the belligerent, the opposition to the state looks like another state. It does governance, it does taxes. Its armed component looks like a uniformed military. So that's a Civil War example. That's the most evolved form of resistance. So these five typologies of resistance can be illustrated across continuum: nonviolent legal, nonviolent illegal, rebellion, insurgency, and belligerency. These categories are useful when you want to examine resistance within a state. You can identify who the primary organizations are of resistance, and then that really affects your methods of support, because each one of those resistance organizations has different weaknesses and different strengths, right? So if you provide Gandhi, some armed means of resistance, like give him some rifles, that doesn't really help his cause, because that's not the type of means he would prefer to use. Meanwhile, if you're supplying arms to a rebellion and you don't want like a long-term conflict, then you probably shouldn't be providing a lot, right? So you really have to look at what your outcomes that you desire are, what kind of resistance movements are there, and then kind of work within the framework of what works best to support that movement, or to, if you want to combat the movement and you're working with your ally, which are the best ways to really combat that movement, right? So if you're supporting the British in India and you help them to use violence, that might not help their cause. It might make it worse. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One thing you didn't mention, which I think a lot of people listening may go, hey, you didn't talk anything about terrorism. I would think terrorism would be somewhere in there. And you do talk about terrorism actually within the model. Could you kind of talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I put terrorism in the third category, right? Which is that you can address it with law enforcement. But it's first of all, terrorism doesn't have a universal agreement, not even in the U.S. government. Yeah. Every single agency in the U.S. government has a different definition for terrorism, and that's for legal purposes, right? Most of the time, we use the word terrorism to give us legal authorities to do things, right? In most places where you're using the term terrorism, it allows you to use military force. So you could use a domestic force. It could be in the third category, or it could be in the fourth category of insurgency. It really depends on how large the threat is and what the government decides to use. So sometimes, I guess it could be in the fourth category. And even in my own research and publications, I drift back and forth depending on the situation on if it's the same as rebellion, a short-term one, or as in the case of insurgency, you're using force. ISIS is a great example. ISIS was an insurgency, right? But in many cases today, it doesn't have the same power or influence. So you might be able to address it with your domestic law enforcement agencies.
Yeah, and so as we're starting to wind down the podcast, for the book's not out yet. I've gone through a little bit of it, not the whole thing, I'll admit, but I mean, just the first article on the resilience and resistance model, I really found fascinating. And like I said, laying that that framework, but also, like you said, it's not trying to create this is a separate study of war that's kind of divorced from the quote unquote, I'm doing finger quotes. Nobody can see that, of course, but I'm doing finger quotes, real war. What you're saying is that, no, this is, again, along the lines with your research study, this is the future of warfare. It's not so much about kind of that state-on-state action that we're spending so much time. I know we talked about this at the beginning. You brought it up, but I think it bears repeating that this is not a separate thing. This is what you see as framing what the future of all warfare is going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, the Cold War is a great, the famous saying goes, war doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. The Cold War is an example of two opponents trying to influence the future of the globe and never actually fighting each other directly, right? Because the costs would be so grave that both decided that wasn't a good idea. And I think with China, we're most likely going to be in a similar example, that there's not going to be another World War III. The Chinese aren't going to push in all their chips and say, let's go at it, let's go toe-to-toe. The Chinese Communist Party hasn't really done that in its history, right? It doesn't like to risk everything. It likes to chip away at you. And so I think that's what we're going to see around the globe in this new multipolar world, both with our adversaries like Russia and China and Iran and North Korea. We're going to see this fighting along the periphery. And so the U.S. can either step back and lose all those fights, or we can step in and try to shape a new world order. Those are all decisions to be made. But the way to really look at all those struggles is to understand what's happening within the state. And then you have three options. You can either support the resiliency of that state, or you can support resistance to the state and have some change within the state. Or you cannot do either one, but you should be doing analysis so that you can make that decision in the future, right? Yeah. So when we have states like Libya, which still has a very, this huge interstate conflict that is happening, the Civil War ended in 2020. Those rumors aren't true, right? So you still need to do the analysis and stay engaged, and do the hard work of understanding what's happening within the state and doing some contingency plans so that you're able to do something when the time is right.
Well, you certainly made the work easier with the publishing of this book. So, I mean, if people are looking to do that hard work, all they have to do is use the link, get a copy of it, and they can start, better informing themselves on these things moving forward. And then, like we said, we have an entire Future of War research campaign coming up, and then over the next few months and all those things, people will be able to download those, watch those, soak those in, so to speak, so that both policymakers, decision makers, and just the average American citizen who in a democracy needs to have an active role if it's to work right, can be well informed as we go forward. So I think you've done a great service, and I look forward to seeing it come out, formally published. I look forward to seeing the other stuff you're going to put out as well. So any final thoughts before we finish the podcast?
No, I think I'm really excited about this. I'm happy to contribute with the book, but going the next step forward, having these GNSI productions with some really great, talented, amazing folks who have, great scholars, but also some great practitioners who have done some amazing things, and getting more insight from them on these topics is going to be great.
Yep. I look forward to it as well, Rob. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Many thanks to Dr. Rob Burrell, Senior Research Fellow at GNSI, soon to be published author again, and the architect of our latest research initiative, The Future of Warfare. You'll be able to find all the future interviews and discussions from that initiative on our YouTube channel in the coming weeks and months. Even better, subscribe to the channel and hit that alert button while you're there so you'll be notified whenever Rob has new insights available. Next week on At the Boundary, our guest will be Charles Lister, a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute and its director of the Syria Initiative. We interviewed Charles previously, but with things ratcheting up over there, we wanted to bring him back for some more discussion. Thanks for listening today. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and let your friends and colleagues know. You can follow GNSI on our LinkedIn and X accounts at USF_GNSI. And check out our website as well at usf.edu/GNSI. While you're there, don't forget to subscribe to our monthly newsletter. That's going to wrap up this episode of At the Boundary. Each new episode will feature global and national security issues we found to be insightful, intriguing, maybe controversial, but overall just worth talking about. I'm Jim Cardoso, and we'll see you at the Boundary.